So, peeps, this is the Q&A session. Now, for an example, I've asked, how do I Google from them? So.
Did you want the answer to that?
No, I'm a software engineer. I should know these things now.
If you go to lngtfy.app, you can go to a site that's called Let Me Google That For You.
Oh!
Enter in a search and it will animate that search being entered into Google. So you can literally send this to when somebody should just Google it. It's amazing, but use it with kindness.
All
Or you can just
right.
send people Rickroll, one or the other.
Rickroll now has 1 billion views. It's fine. The world isn't on fire.
All right. Steph has a question. Steph?
Hey guys, I thought I might as well get the ball rolling. So, what's the most challenging project you've ever done?
Brett, I think, has a candidate based on that reaction.
Have I just given him PTSD?
Well, not given, reminded me of the fact that I do have PTSD from several projects that have crashed and burned. There was this great one called Google Plus, but that's probably before your time. There was a project. I sort of elided some of the timeline of getting hired at Google. So just to put things in progress, it took me about 5 years to get hired at Google. So I think there's actually a story there. For those of you who are looking to apply to Google, try and try again. Don't go, oh, I've tried once, I'll never try again. Very much approach it as a learning experience. Yeah, I failed like so many different ways for so many different roles at Google. And it's all good. I'm here now, have been for a while. I'm now part of the furniture. Where was I going with this? Oh yes, failed projects. So the project I actually was initially in pipeline to be hired to be DevRel for, because I was out in the community being so active with it, was a thing called Google Wave. That crashed and burned like weeks before I joined. Like I was almost to the point where they were about ready to send me paperwork to join the company, and they rang me up and said, yeah, that role is no longer there. At which point I pinged some people I knew. I went, what's happening to Google Wave? And they went, nothing. And 2 weeks later, it's like, yeah, it's going away. Bye. Then there was Google Maps Engine, which was a great product until we knifed it in the back, and several others. Google Plus is probably the most painful one now. Being developer relations for a product that had almost no developer APIs is difficult. Does anyone else want to tell stories out of school?
Does it have to be about a Google project? Because I remember the time I got an on-call pager because I broke every bakery in Victoria.
What?
A server that was required to print the labels on a certain baker based out of Victoria did Windows updates and didn't come back. It was literally a case of, by the end of that very long night, yes, we did get that bread. Yes, that reference is still valid. Craig, horror story, go.
Oh, no. You see, I don't write enough code to break enough things to compare. I just write the wordy things, you know. So I will leave the destruction to you guys.
But the flames, they are so pretty.
Let's see. The most difficult has been one of both human engineering and actual software engineering, where we were told to go out and we were looking for a new CMS to port all of our documentation over, and we were asked to do all of the research and spend a lot of time and prove what was good, and we did that, and they said, great, we're moving to Salesforce. And we're like, what? And then so we got stuck with this system that was not capable and that we didn't want to use. And I think it was about 8 solid weeks of, I think it was 8 in the morning till about 11 at night, just solidly punching stuff in until it worked and finding contractors who could do custom work for us and all sorts of things just so an executive could get the software that they wanted. So sometimes life is fun, but I didn't break anything, thankfully. You can sometimes make things work. I am very distracted. There is a nodding Gandalf sitting in my corner consistently, and it's amazing. And it just looks like he's affirming my life experience. It's just like, yeah, I feel you, man. Yeah.
Alrighty, shall we move on to the next question then? The question that we've been waiting for is from Adiraj. What they have asked is, what does Google look for when hiring software developer interns? And 4 people have upvoted that. So.
We actually have a great hiring talk that we sort of roll around the universities, where we actually work through a hiring interview, mock hiring interview. Don't think I can really replicate it in this context without any pre-working, because that would be kind of painful. But there is actually a great book on my shelf called Cracking the Coding Interview, that was written by an ex-Googler who served on our hiring committees for many years, and has also, worked at other large tech companies based in California. Pretty much everything that she says in that book is true. So start there, work out.
Also, for your information, students, we do have a Google coding interview event to be planned in the future for this semester as well. Just saying, that will happen.
Actually, I Adiraj posted a follow-up question somewhere about should you focus on data structures? Absolutely. One of the things that we will ask you somewhere in the interview, no matter what you're going for, if it's a technical role, is a data structures and algorithm question. In fact, I have mine, and it's based on a concept that's covered in about the second lecture of Data Structures 101. And it breaks most people who apply. Like, as in, they leave the interview crying, and then they go and look at the Wikipedia page and go, oh, it was there all along.
Were you my interviewer?
No, Katie, I would never have done that to you. You're too nice a person.
For some non-developer focused stuff, there is a book by a person called Laszlo Bock called Work Rules that speaks pretty explicitly about what Google looks for during the interviewing process and in terms of culture and the way people think. I found that to be incredibly useful and very accurate when I went through the interviewing process.
Coolios. On to the next question by Sydney.
Hi, I just asked, what is Flutter and what can I do with it? Please explain it to me like I'm 5.
That's you, Brett.
So the 2-minute elevator pitch is that writing user interfaces is hard, and what happens when you hand a hard problem to a bunch of engineers and go, make this easy? The specific problem was initially one that was posed to some Chrome engineers, which was making a web page inside of Chrome on a desktop 60 frames per second is hard but doable. We've got a bunch of tooling inside of Chrome that make this possible. Trying to do this consistently on a mobile phone is terribly hard because there's a bunch of limitations. It's a embedded device, it has limited battery. So the problem was posed to these engineers: how do you make it possible to do 60 frames per second animation consistently on mobile phones? And so they took a web browser, Chrome, perchance because they were Chrome engineers, and stripped it down to the point where they could consistently hit 60 frames per second with the code they were writing. And along the way, they threw out most of the things that you or I would recognize as a web browser and wound up with this boiled down version of a custom web browser. So it's built on top of Skia, which is the rendering engine that Chrome uses, that Android uses, Chrome OS, so on and so forth. Many, many things use Skia. And then a custom layer on top of it that looks kind of like a web browser. So you've got the parts, you've got what looks almost like a DOM, but it's optimized. It's an optimized game engine backend for 2D games, basically. Just that the 2D games look like any other native application for a phone. This was great. It worked on iOS and Android. And I went, we could actually make this work in a web browser too, which is hilarious. And that's where Flutter for Web came from. And then some engineers went, we can make this work on desktop as well. And that's where Flutter for Mac OS and Windows and Linux came from. So it's a way of writing applications on a whole bunch of different devices using a reactive or a React-inspired programming API. Hopefully that story gives you a flavor of what Flutter is about. Cool. Next question.
Alrighty, next question due to popular demand is from PK for Katie.
Hey Katie, so my question was, how did you get started with open source and what was it like in the beginning, like your baby steps into open source and how you dived into the world of open source?
Gosh, well, my story is weird, but I'll share it anyway. Back in the day, I was working for a particular software engineering and web hosting place in Sydney, in the CBD, and it was all fancy. We were in a tall high-rise. New head of engineering comes along, says, we're going to build our own database, and in a year, we're going to write papers and give conference presentations about it. I'm like, cool. What kind of conferences are they? And through that, it's like I started working on this project, and the entire time I was working on it, it was all on GitHub, back when GitHub was very new. And I was writing it with future me in mind, that I would have to talk about it one day. All my commit messages were the justification to myself of why I was making the change. That is a very good thing to do, by the way. It's like your code is the change, but then your description is why you did it. And so you don't put that in the comment of the code because that'll get stale and bit rot. You put it where it's important, which is the time of the commit. Anyway, I gave my first conference presentation. It went terribly. My demo broke, but it was great because it was a smaller event. And then a couple of months later, I gave the same talk again that had been updated and the code had been fixed, and it was great. And it was also overseas. It's like, cool. And I met all these wonderful people, still keep in touch with a lot of them to this day. And that was really great. Then that company let me go and I had to start all over again with a completely different project at a completely different company. However, that story was my first keynote talk. So it sort of just rolls in together with I had an opportunity to do something, and that experience rolled into something else and rolled into something else. That's how I got started. But that was the question, and I have it open here. What was it like in the beginning? Working in public is hard because everyone can see your stuff. Thankfully, there are a lot of people working in public, and unless you say something weird on social media and people go trawling through your GitHubs to try to critique all your code, people normally don't care. And I say that as someone who has friends who have had very loud opinions on the internet and then have had people come and tell them they weren't real engineers because their code on the internet wasn't what Hacker News would have done. But there are now community controls and codes of conduct and moderation tools around all these social coding platforms, which means that is less scary nowadays. Being a woman on the internet is fun. There's a reason why I have a gender-neutral handle, and my face has only been on my profile since I started showing my face in public at conferences. That was a downer. But that's how I got started. Trial by fire. Next question.
Alrighty, the next question is by Vanessa.
Hi. So my question was, what sort of fun or personal projects that you guys are working on?
I have a puppy. Does that count as a personal project?
I am currently building a Witcher-themed Dungeons & Dragons 5e one-shot for my friends to play along with. What people spoke about earlier about being a dirty great nerd and leaning hard into it, yes, that is my life.
Awesome.
It's about now that I don't show off my Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition rulebooks, right?
This bear is from Critical Role, the Dungeons and Dragons actual play. This is Trinket, the Wonder Bear, and he's amazing.
I'm spotting a theme. By the way, D&D is not a prerequisite to being hired at Google. Just
Yes, it is.
Noted.
I tend to
You
miss
have to
about.
be. I was
Okay.
about to say you have to be at least 16 charisma, but anyway.
I fail then.
Just in case, if it is a prerequisite, just know that I have this as well.
Hey.
Who else would like to tell their fun projects? Shall
Well,
we go
Brett
then?
has a doggo. I have an app that helps me do cross-stitching. Sadly, I don't have any cross-stitching that I can grab, but I do a lot of fiber arts and knitting and stuff, and one of my projects wasn't working too well on Windows, and so I ended up making an app to fix it. But a lot of my personal projects don't normally do code because I get paid to do code now. I don't want to do my work as my hobby, which is absolutely fine. Like, if you want to hack on cool stuff in your spare time, that's cool. You do not have to code all the time to be an engineer. It's a reason why it's a 9 to 5.
Yeah. Hilariously for me, when I was back before I joined Google, my hobby was going to conferences and presenting. And now that my day job is figuring out things to present, my nighttime hobby is to write code that turns into code labs and we then present. So I'm not quite sure how to square that circle.
Yeah, I think I stopped writing theatrical plays after I started doing writing as a day job. I was like, but I love theater. And it's like, but I've been writing all day. Why more?
I think there was a question about burnout that may go directly into this.
Yep.
Yeah, that burnout question was from PK, was it?
Yeah, I thought like this question is like covering the burnout part, so
Did you remove it?
yeah.
I saw it, but yes,
Me too. You want to
burnout is
speak
a
to it,
thing.
Katie?
Yeah, so the question was, how do you three avoid burnouts? Like, you are working as developers for so many years and you're always staying updated on new technologies. So seems like a lot of work. And when I get burnout, I just take a month or 2 months of vacation and I go. But what do you guys?
I can tell a story here. After a really bad contract before I joined Google, I spent 3 months on a beach staring at nothing because I'd worked so many 30-hour days that I quite literally couldn't. And then I came back to Sydney and did a couple of jobs and wound up at Google. And strangely enough, I've had every manager I've had since I joined Google go, Brett, you're working too hard. Dude, slow down. It's a thing we do for each other, and I know I've pinged Katie on the odd occasion of going, Katie, go home. Seriously, go the fuck home. We look after each other. It's the simplest answer.
Yeah.
Because once you get in the zone, you don't want to drop out of the zone because you're on a roll, and you need someone to remind you you've been standing at your desk for 7 hours straight. Maybe you want to take a break.
The whole trying to separate work from home right now is super hard. But today, it is well past sunset. I'm doing an event, so I buggered off for several hours in the middle of my day because I could come back, and that's cool. I also let these folks know if I disappear, and it's like, we want to make sure you're at the event. No, I'm fine. I'm at the event. It's fine. I'll come back. I was just getting a spam call. That was fun.
If you've experienced burnout before, it's not fun. As Brett said, you literally get to a point of, I just can't. And you perhaps really want to, but you can't make things move. After a certain amount of time, you do start to pick up the signs, and you might start becoming capable of a little bit of self-care. And self-care is really important as well. And being able to say, I need to step away now, or I need to change something. I need to go for a run. I need to exercise is wonderful. Sleep is wonderful. Many of the things that combat depression are very effective for burnout as well, in terms of just looking after yourself. And yes, if you can have a team that surrounds you, that, like my manager as well has said to me, okay, no, do you have some leave time? Do you want to take a break now? It's really good to have a team around you that can recognize the signs when it comes in.
Okay, so let's put a positive spin on this, and Cutie, you can ask your question, and also the first part as well.
Yeah, okay, so I'm really happy about the talk you guys were doing. It makes me so happy, and thank you for all the information. It's very helpful. My question is, how to get the first job as a software engineer? And could you please share with us some of your experiences? Thank you.
That counts me out, so that's one of you guys.
Kind of hard for me because it was like 30 years ago that I got my first job. Okay, maybe 20. Katie?
My first paid software gig was the industry placement program I did in my third year. We could either write a thesis or we could do 6 months in industry as part of our final year project. And so I got to do 6 months at a mining place doing Oracle and Citrix stuff. And they ended up hiring me as a part-time engineer through my final year, and then they offered me a full-time role. That's how I did it, but also, I mean, I'm not sure how RMIT stuff works with that. This was through Griffith. So, and I want to clarify, the joke I made earlier is that I didn't go to a cool IT school. I went to Griffith, which is like Macquarie for New South Wales people. And it's like, not University of Melbourne, not RMIT, but anyone else in Victoria. It's fine. You get experience, you get a degree, and after a couple of years, that's all that matters. And it's fine. My university was on top of the hill and it was all bushland around it. And back when they started, you had to get a Bachelor of Environmental Engineering with anything else. It's a hippie uni.
Oh,
Do you think, I know at least amongst technical writing, some of the recommendation is that if you don't have previous work, being involved in the open source community can really help. Open source needs a lot of good documentation, but I am thinking
Open source needs documenters.
But I think also maybe a certain amount of exposure, especially if you're working with a project that has a fairly high amount of notoriety, you might get attention as a developer. What do you guys think, Brett? Katie, do you think open source could be a good way forward?
Open source is definitely something I look at when I've got a candidate in front of me. I will, and this is going to sound kind of backwards, but I'm not actually looking at the code so much. As long as, data structures and algorithms are okay, everything else is trainable, fixable, between linters and code review and all that sort of thing. The thing I'm really looking for in a software engineer is being inquisitive, so diving into things, being humble, so being able to say, I have no idea what's going on here, can you help? And being able to work with people. One of the fun things about getting hired at Google, our internship program is like a 3-month job interview. And the primary thing we look at is, can you work with your team such that you can ship something in that 3 months that you're with the company? Because it turns out if you come into Google thinking you're the hottest thing since the really hot thing, and you don't actually work with anyone, you can't actually ship anything. And we don't want people who can't work with other people. So what I look for in GitHub is your ability to work with people.
May I yes and that? You do not have to have a GitHub profile to be hired anywhere. Brett said when he looks at a GitHub, you do not have to provide one. There is absolutely a whole lot of free labor that goes into open source. Students and everyone is told, oh, you have to code on weekends, you have to have a GitHub, you have to. The reason we look for GitHub is because it's a public portfolio. Your university projects, you may be able to share some of that. Some of your corporate projects, you probably won't. We just want proof of how you work. And GitHub is one of the more easily accessible variations on that. GitHub didn't exist when I was hired as a software engineer, so I couldn't show a GitHub profile. Just saying. But yes, working with others is very good, and I know it sucks where it's like, you need experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. I know, it sucks, but you will get there, I promise. Wait, we were supposed to end on an upper.
Yeah, you made a heart symbol. Right?
Yeah.
There was a chat comment about connecting with recruiters. See if I can use our technology stack. Right, Adaraj, how can we connect with Google recruiters in order to push forward our application process? You can't. Sorry.
Yeah. You apply for a job, it goes into a little black hole for an indeterminate amount of time, and then you will be contacted. Hiring at Google is a very precise but sometimes a long process. For instance, I think it was 3 and a bit months and 8 interviews to get across the line. And yeah, exactly. I was going to say that is not actually long.
That's lightning fast for Google.
Yeah. So by all means, submit through the regular channels, but that conversation starts when the HR person says, "Hey, I'm interested. Let's have a chat."
There's probably public stats somewhere where it's like Google gets millions of applications a year. It's not you.
Yeah. I feel I should answer a question that's come up in chat, and I think it's also in the Q&A box about Kotlin at Google. Although I am touching the live wire here. Kotlin is now allowed to be used at Google. And yeah, I know, that's amazing. Kotlin is now actually being checked into Google 3. There was a number of years where Kotlin was used in the community. It wasn't allowed to be used at Google. It is now allowed to be used, but Java is still being used. So there's no replacing, it's just, okay, step back 2 steps. Google is an interesting company in that it's not a top-down command economy. It's a bottom-up, demonstrate you have value economy. And that's going to sound a bit strange, and it breaks people's brains, but every 6 months, all of us get to sit down and write a packet that demonstrates that we brought value to the company. It's called the Perf Review Cycle, and it starts in, 2 weeks? Sorry, Katie.
No, it doesn't. I
Sorry.
don't. No, I'm not listening.
Sorry, how to induce PTSD over a GDC link.
This is my emotional support plushie now.
Ever since you've shown me that avocado, I'm trying to think of what plush thing I can get to be a writer, and all that comes into my head is writer, like the compliment. And it's just, I cannot think of anything else.
Maybe a huge pen plushie.
I want to take Jacqueline Lynn's question, because that looks fun.
Yeah.
Jacqueline, do you want to ask?
Yeah, so what kind of advice can you give to someone who's jumping around keep on exploring different stuff without really focusing on one thing. Because for me, I keep like, for example, for the past few months, I did like kind of front end, but now I'm exploring machine learning. So it's pretty quite different. So what kind of advice is that?
Keep
Sounds
going.
like Gabrielle.
Yeah.
But then I heard that having a specialty is better than having multiple stuff.
Okay. Sorry, Katie, you go.
No, I was just going to say that many people have many opinions. Would you like to know how many programming languages I know?
All right, yeah.
I have a talk which has 14 different programming languages in it. Being eclectic is okay. Understanding multiple things is okay. You don't have to have a specialization. If you can prove that you can pick up new things quickly, that's going to help you better in the long run. So if you've learned things from your machine learning side that might help you with data pipeline stuff later, or your front end makes sure that your websites actually look good
And are usable.
then that is and are usable, that's going to help you. All these different skills blend together. And yes, avocados are great. Also, the nub is right under my neck and it was hurting.
So the one concept I want to bring to the fore here is a little thing called T-shaped people or T-shaped skills, where you're an inch thick, a mile wide, and then you're a mile deep, sort of in the middle there somewhere. I don't think I'm actually that T-shaped, but I like to try. Yeah, DevRel's a great place for people who like jumping around because we do a lot of it. I have to do in a week. I'll do some back-end stuff. I'll do some system administration stuff. Then I'll do some front-end UX design. Then I'll document it. Then I'll go and present it to someone to check that it actually makes sense. And then halfway through the presentation, I'll get a ping saying the site's down. Should I go fix it? This is just a normal week for me. So yeah, stick with it, Jack. Just stay the course. It's all good.
Yeah, because I keep getting curious a lot.
That's an excellent thing to do. Yeah, keep doing that.
Thank you.
Next question's by Flynn.
Hey, I was just wondering what are some of the biggest changes you anticipate are coming for the way we develop software?
Have you heard of Copilot yet? There's now technology that writes code for you.
So it's about here that I admit that I'm a second generation programmer. And I remember when, just to put it in context, I've got disappearing grey hair up here. Back when I was like 8 and I was asking my dad about this fourth generation programming thing that the Japanese were coming up to get rid of the need to write programs. Yeah, AI is not taking over what we do. Hilariously, and I can say this because I work at a company that's an AI programming language company, or an AI company really. AI just comes along and becomes part of the substructure. Once upon a time, breadth first search and depth first search were considered AI, just for context.
I would be remiss to maybe not talk about the stuff that my partner is doing at the moment, but she sees a need to move beyond text-based coding.
Oh God, please, yes.
Unfortunately, it's a massive field, but it comes with a huge amount of benefits, including less punctuation, not worrying about syntax, and just making things a lot more accessible to people. But it's still very early days, so potentially that might be one way that it hits.
Craig, is that a thing that someone could maybe see a talk about?
That is, and perhaps there might be a talk at, what's it called? PyCon AU this year? When would that be on, Katie?
That would be on the weekend of the 10th to the 12th of September.
Oh, wow.
Online.
Fantastic.
Yes. Real Python native blocks is a talk. I'm going to throw the schedule in the chat for you all to get excited.
There was a
And
question
just-
along like, could Unity be considered non-text based coding? I haven't used a lot of Unity, but I'm aware of something like Unreal Engine and their blueprints and things like that, where it's not necessarily all text.
Yes.
There are movements towards that world in the gaming world and in the 3D world as well.
And there's a lot of no or low code solutions out there now, where for a lot of patterns of how you would develop things, there's so many commonalities to it that there are some systems where you can drag boxes around. But there will always be a need to be verbose, there will always be a need to be empathetic, and there will also always be a need to solve human problems. I have a sticker on my laptop which is, we are humans. What does it say? We are humans working with humans to develop software for the benefit of humans. There will always be a human involved somewhere in the chain. Yes, and we have an entire track for data science and analytics.
I was about to say Python's reason du jour is data science and analytics. So
Yes.
Definitely those talks are there.
I have code on Mars.
You what?
The Mars helicopter has code on it that I contributed to. I have code on Mars.
Okay, why didn't you say that for the cool project bit? Wow.
Because doggos. I can't cuddle Mars yet.
Oh, come on. Oh, Isaac's question is hurting my head.
I will mention a few of the things that I do when I get launched into something that is completely foreign and strange and I've never used it before. The first thing I do is spend a lot of time with it to see if I can understand it in my own way and from my own perspective. And then I just go asking a whole bunch of questions. And there's this wonderful question that I use. So when you're a new employee at Googler, they call you a noogler, a new Googler. And the most incredible question of all time is to say, hi, I'm a noogler. Tell me everything. Now, I've been at Google almost 2 years, but that still works. So you will find that generally people are quite kind and that they will want to explain the thing that they're passionate about. So just keep asking questions. Dig in any way you can. Make contacts with people. Go to places like PyCon and community events and talk to people. Surround yourself with smart people in the field who can bring you up to that level. I could talk on forever, but I'll stop and give someone else a chance now.
I'm sorry, what was the question for this one?
What are some strategies you use when learning something new on the job?
Oh, this is really easy because Craig's quick start tutorials or like 101 tutorials have already been written by the time I get there. So my first step is try out the Hello World tutorial. If I can't get that working, then there's feedback. Once I get that working, I try to push the boundaries a bit. I try to do things that I've done before. I'm a big Python person, but I'm also a big Django person. If something has a database, the first thing I try to do is, can this run Django? And so I try to do that. And then I just poke at it more and more and more and more. But I rely so heavily on the introductory tutorials for anything that exists. And that they were created for first-time users of the thing. I've been in technology for how many years now, and I still run the introductory tutorials all the time, and I refer back to them because they are there for the explain it like I'm 5 crowd or run it like I'm 5 crowd. Yeah.
If you're looking at something that is incredibly vast, like this giant ball of twine, you have to pick a thread to pull and see what happens. And I found that it's completely useless. While I'm learning something, I will write down what I've learned, and I will never read that note again. But the pure act of committing it to paper somehow sees it into my brain, and slowly I can start putting all the things together. It's dumb. It works for me.
Yes, and I find typing in the code. It might look stupid typing in hello world, but you know what? You'll make a mistake and the compiler will give you an error and you'll read up on what that error means and you'll learn something. And then you type the next sample in and it also breaks because I can't type straight. or my X key double X's or something. So yes, the funny thing about our game is there is no great way to learn apart from beat your head against the wall until your head is sufficiently wall-shaped.
Alrighty. The next one is from Sadeep. Sadeep, you're on mute.
So I guess my question was answered regarding the Kotlin and Java part. And basically, I also had another question. Like, this is a very funny question. Like, will Google ask me how to reverse a linked list in an interview?
My question that I use is not, it's not about linked lists, but it's almost that level. And hilariously, the reason I ask it is that it sorts out people who can think from people who have just, like, the sorts of questions we'll ask is sort of like, don't show me that you've memorized an algorithm or a data structure. Prove to me that you can think how I can extend it. Does that make sense? I think he's frozen.
Oh, probably.
Okay, so.
The next one is Sydney.
Yeah, you mentioned a pretty interesting project. How does your app project help you with cross-stitching, Katie?
Goodness. Okay. I do an entire talk about this, so let me bring it down to a little bit. I had an app that I used on a Windows machine where you would send it an image and it would go through and go, okay, you want it to be at a 1:1 scale. I'm going to take every pixel, find the closest color to the thread and graph that for you so you can go through with needle and thread and stitch it all. That software only worked on Windows XP, and then Windows XP went away and I started using not Windows anymore. So I had to make something else. At my first conference, I said, at the next conference, I will have this app for you and I will present it. 5 years later, I had the app working. So it's a website. You upload a picture and it goes through all the pixels based on like whatever scaling you give it. And it goes, okay, you want this image at 2 by scale in Lego. I know the Lego colors. I'll scale your thing down by 2, and for every single thing, I'll guess the closest color using a algorithm that they use to work out the different colors of car paint, which is a approximation of human color detection, which is really easy because it's just import from scikit data, scikit image. So I didn't have to write that algorithm. I could just import it. It was great. But you upload an image, it goes through it all, and then it puts it into a table, and a HTML table, and then you can just zoom in as far as you need and see all the little symbols and take a wonderful bits of dowel from Bunnings with some upholstery tacks and a great big loom and just sit there with Games Done Quick on the Twitch, on the TV, and just stab something for hours and hours and hours, and then you get art. That's my cross-stitching app.
Sounds like therapy.
I get to stab something thousands and thousands of times and call it art. It's a stabbing good time. I'm sorry.
This is what I've got to work with, just saying.
No, you don't, because we've been working for home for so long. You don't have to deal with this at all.
More's the pity.
Yep. Next question's by Ricky.
Hey, I don't have a webcam, unfortunately, but I'll go with my second question. Yeah, is it possible to change the work times? Let's say I work at Google, because is it possible to change it to a different time, but have the same amount of hours? And the reason I'm saying this is because last semester I had a subject which was pretty crazy, and it, well, to put it shortly, it screwed up my sleep schedule. And for a whole 2 weeks straight, I worked every day from starting to like waking up, having breakfast, whatever, and then just working the entire day until 5:30 a.m. for like a whole 2 weeks.
Dude, I feel you. That's right.
Not healthy, but I was wondering, I actually work a lot better at night, so it's like, is it possible to change it so that you don't start at 9 a.m.?
So I guess I'll start with this in saying that Google is a reasonably flexible workplace, but having said that, you still have to interact with your workmates. And generally, as long as your manager's okay with things, fine. But the reality is most people are probably going to be there during office hours. I don't know whether, Brett, Katie, you have other experience there.
I unfortunately do, because there's an upside to living on the east coast of Australia, in that I get to live in a wonderful part of the world. There's a downside to living on the east coast of Australia.
Is it called the east coast of the US?
Mostly the west coast, but also Europe. So in my first role at Google, I had a weekly that kicked off at 2:30 a.m. So I would get up for that meeting, or I'd stay up for that meeting, and then I'd be kind of trashy for the rest of the day. Now that I'm a bit older and a bit wiser, I've told people nothing before 6 a.m. So my days usually start at 7, and I'll do a block of meetings and email. Then I'll go and walk the dog and, zone out for a couple of hours, and I come in again at sort of like 1 or 2 in the afternoon and do another 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours. So yeah, we're all quite adaptable here, but yes, you kind of have to negotiate with your team as to meeting hours and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And sorry. It's like, speaking of adaptability, how long does it take to actually get familiar with the workspace?
What do you
Brett,
mean by
are you
that question?
familiar yet?
No, I don't think so.
All right, good to know.
Can you define workspace?
Yes.
I know, it's like, let's say I'm a new recruit at Google, and like I know absolutely nothing. I've just joined. I don't know any of the services. Like, how long does it take to get familiar with like everyone being there, doing the job?
Hey, Katie, so there's a hat behind you.
I'm prop lady. It's great. So here's the hat.
Googler. Right, the new Googler.
The fun thing is
mentioned.
that Google is such an incredibly broad space, and you can learn the tools that you work on reasonably quickly depending on your previous experience. But the fact is that you will be exposed every day to something new. And then just as you're starting to feel comfortable, a new project will spin up, and then you'll have to do that. And you'll have to, I think, I don't know whether it was Katie or Brett spoke of the phrase drinking from the fire hose. It is exactly that. Suddenly you have so much information, you're just like, my mouth is not wide enough, I can't contain. You're always learning. So the most useful thing is not getting used to the workspace, but learning how to adapt.
Not gonna lie, it sounds like fun.
I was mentioning the whole holding on to the train that's going at 150 mile an hour. That's talking to the fact that you are never going to be comfortable. I do believe we have a company phrasing about being uncomfortably excited. Anyway, yes.
I was going to say, to be the happy person, is that Google's so big, we have so many people onboarding that we have entire structures that run for the first couple of months, intensively in the first couple of weeks, and then throughout the first 6 months, where it helps you get a hang of how the place works, not your specific tech, but even just the meta processes. Basically, you get a free pass if you're under 6 months at the company. And I'm pretty sure that we're allowed to now say 6 months in an office, because the onboarding experience for some of our remote only employees has not been as good as it could have been in a real office, because you don't get, what's the thing that we don't get anymore? All right, people.
Contact. Yes.
People. I miss people. But yeah, you're always allowed to ask questions. You will always be drinking from the fire hose. That whole thing that we were talking about before with, I do a bit of UX, I do a bit of ML. Good. Keep learning how you learn. because you're gonna learn something new all the time. Like today, I was doing some really weird stuff in Git, and I had tutorials open, and I had the manual pages open. I mean, I played around with some of the how Git actually works before, but I still had to bring it up again. I was able to use some of my previous experiences, but I still had the help pages open, whatever. Oh yeah, you're allowed to Google at Google. That's totally allowed.
Expected even.
Yes, just not during your interview. Don't Google during your interview. We can tell if you go on mute and then you read from Wikipedia.
We know that page.
We probably wrote that page.
Yeah. Please, for the love of God, do not put I wrote the book on X in your resume unless you did actually write the book on X, because we'll probably find the guy that wrote the book on X and stick him in your interview queue.
Because we probably have already hired the guy that wrote the book on X, yes.
I heard of someone who put I wrote the book on Python and they stuck him in the same interview queue as the dictator for life. It's no longer the dictator. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
What?
Yes.
That.
Katie is broken.
I want to have been a fly on the wall where it's like, did the interviewee not recognize or recognize? How did that happen? Were they so full of themselves that they didn't realize, no, sorry, hi, I wrote Python. You can't explain Python to me. I want to know what happened. Oh my god.
I don't know. Guido is such a down-to-earth guy and such a humble person that I doubt he would have even
said anything.
Yeah.
For context, this is Guido van Rossum, the guy who made Python back in the day. So, the fact that we call language developers by their first name is a thing now. Is that your craziest interview experience? Well,
no.
It was a story of what was your craziest interview experience, Brett?
I don't think that's publishable.
That bad, huh?
I've got to answer the git flow versus trunk versus committing directly to master question.
Yep. So Sydney's one.
Waiting.
Sydney has one for Craig.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can ask that now. Just quickly. So, for Craig, what are some cool products or projects that you've written for?
Oh my goodness. Well, it depends on your definition of cool. If you can stretch that out as far as possible. Documentation can be pretty straight-laced at times. And so I actually find what's more fun is designing documentation systems and making it easier for people to read, so building features into them, things like that. But I have worked on the Google Photos API documentation. It's brand new, launched, and was received really, really well, to the point that they started building cameras that use that API to just upload stuff directly into Google Photos, and that was awesome to watch that develop. As of late, I have been working a bit in cloud and trying to teach people how to, as I said earlier, connect all of those bits together, but that is a massive surface, and I'm doing that thing now, pulling yarns, little bits of string here and there to try and understand how the whole thing works. Back in the day, I was a technology journalist. I worked for a magazine called Atomic Maximum Power Computing, which meant I was locked in a dank lab with graphics cards and CPUs that I overclocked every day and then wrote about that. So that's probably the coolest thing that I can possibly say that I've done.
Very cool. And the last question is from Benjamin.
No, we skipped Wei Ming's question.
Oh.
That has not been answered.
My bad.
Hi, yeah, I can ask my question. Thanks for the talk, really
Sorry.
enjoyed it. Yeah, I just want to get your opinions on depending on Git flow versus strong-based development versus committing directly to master. I've been reading an article by Google, and they say they really love strong-based development, and I just want to hear if that's really the case and why. Yeah, thanks.
Do you have a link to that article, perchance?
Okay, I can Google it, and then I'll give you the link.
So I've been asked variants of this question before, where someone told me, like, let's step back 2 steps. Someone told me that Google uses direct to master or direct commit to master in justifying the fact that they don't use testing. And one of the funny things from my point of view is that Google's idea of a code base is kind of different from most of people. How many code bases do you know that has 50,000 people who can commit to it on a daily basis?
Very little.
Yeah. The vast majority of Google works on a single code base called Google 3. And so if you want to ask questions about what we think about code development, most of it is sort of based in this reality that all the software engineers at Google, apart from the few odd people like DevRel who work in Git and GitHub, all of them commit to this one code base, which means that all of their processes are built around committing to one code base and not stepping on each other's toes, which means things like every time an engineer at Google commits to Google 3, all of their code gets run against all of the tests for everything that runs on Google 3, including all of the search engines and all the various front ends and all the Android and iOS apps. And only when all of those tests pass on the data center built for running all those tests does it actually land. So I'm not quite sure what most people would think of that is, and I don't think it's commit direct to master, which someone was trying to tell me it was.
The comment is, wow, it must take forever to clone. That's the fun thing. You don't.
It used to.
You don't anymore. Too big.
So there was a fun thing that for a while when most of the engineers at Google were on the west coast of the US, you did actually effectively clone the majority of it. And then the engineers in Sydney went, this doesn't work because we're on the wrong end of a very thin pipe. And we actually built special software, for engineers in Sydney not to check everything out. And then they baked that into the core of our Google 3 infrastructure, which is what you're talking about, Katie, was the stuff that Sydney built so that we could actually work. Because software engineers in Sydney wound up having machines in America so they could work on a code base.
There is a reason why things are better now, and
Yes.
I don't know about how they were worse. Brett's been here longer than I have.
I'm part of the furniture now.
You keep on saying that. I was going to have a take at this question, but I also realized I think we're supposed to go into the mingling bit. Or can we keep going a little bit?
Yeah,
or...
there's 2 more questions left, so then we can go to the mingling.
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, on the Git flow versus trunk-based development versus committing directly to master, I mean, we don't call it master anymore. We call it main or latest, which is one thing. But also trunk-based development and committing directly to the head is sort of the same thing. One of the things that I do is I help run a series of workshops where I deliver research that has been undertaken for many years about how software teams perform at elite levels, about how to get faster deployments, how to get less errors, how to get quicker fixes. One of the elements in there is trunk-based development, but it's also about making sure that you do small changes, that they go into the main system quickly, that everyone can see what's going on so you don't collide together. It's about people and communicating. But I will also totally commit directly to main, but it also means I don't have time to run my tests because my tests may not run on main. In my own personal projects, I will do pull requests because I have so many things set up like unit testing or deployment previews and all that stuff. Even if it's just me, I do done stuff up all the time, so I do it that way, but I also try to keep my number of changes in progress small. I try, says she who made her biggest change yet the other day. But yeah, it's all about trying to make sure that you know what's changing in your system because your system's going to get big and complicated, and also making sure that like people can work together effectively, which is why you don't keep things away from other people. And then it's just like, here, got you something, thunk. Why is everything broken now?
Turns out writing documents to say what you're going to do first help.
That boring design process, yeah.
Yeah. Being able to communicate to other humans, being human to human, yeah, it's a good thing.
Cool, thank you.
Coolio. And on to Benjamin's question now.
Yes. So my question is, what is it about Google or the tech world that motivates you to do what you do? I mean, there's so many things in the world you could be doing, but some of us like Brett or Craig, you might stumble along something and it's like, oh no, I have to do this now. But if you know the one thing or two that motivates you, I'd like to know.
Fury that something on the internet is wrong. And so I spend a lot of time going through documentation going, no, it's not right. It's not right. It must be fixed. I like to make sure people are educated and using things well, and I have a very specific way of doing it. And technical writing is very detailed like that. So yes, that is my short answer. But also, look, how often do you get the chance to touch something that is used by billions of people and to be a part of that? Like, that's incredibly motivating to me. Brett? Katie?
Katie?
Explain developer relations poorly. I get frustrated, so you don't have to. Pretty much what Craig said. If I go through a tutorial or some documentation or our product and see that something is wrong, I've seen it, I can fix it, and I may have stopped one other person from wasting 6 hours of their day trying to work it out. Multiply that by how many people use our products. I've saved years of people's lives by being that person that went, this is wrong, but I have the power to fix it. That's pretty freaking cool.
I can't top that.
I win.
You win, Katie. Too easy.
Oh wait, one last question. Is Sydney's one already answered, or do you want to go through with it?
I'll ask it. Sorry if you guys are getting tired because this one's not one to Brett. Sorry. Similar to last question about Flutter. What's Dart and what can I do with it? Please explain like I'm 5.
So back in the first days, there was a team of engineers in Aarhus who specialized in making a programming language that none of you have heard of called Smalltalk Run Fast. They were a bunch of academics, they wrote a bunch of papers, and then they moved to California and went and worked on a small programming language that no one's heard of called Java, and took it from being an incredibly painfully slow programming language to something that was actually quite fast. The work they did was the basis of the hotspot VM, basically. And having mastered that one, they quit themselves out of Sun and went and worked at a small company none of you have heard of called Google, making a small programming language none of you have heard of go from incredibly slow and painfully slow, in fact, to actually quite fast, called JavaScript. And after having done all that, they sat down and went, we're kind of sick of making sucky programming languages fast. We'd actually like to design a language that's been built to be fast. And so they wrote Dart. And then they tried to figure out how to get this programming language that they quite enjoyed making out to the world. And it was kind of failing for a while because they were in the Chrome org, but Chrome didn't want to take it on as an official language. I sort of flopped around for a bit. And then there was this team who were working on making this API for making applications at 60 frames per second that needed a programming language with some very, very strange requirements. They wanted it to both be ahead of time compilable to ARM assembly, as well as be able to hot reload so that you could, sort of like a web developer, you type some code, you hit save, and it's on your device. So they went around, looking around, trying to find a programming language that had this sort of ability to write incredibly optimized precompiled code and to have hot reload. And they found this team called Dart, and they went, oh, we'll just take this technology and shove it in the side of our kit. Yes, so for context, Flutter was initially written in JavaScript, but they couldn't get the speed that they wanted. And so they wound up adopting Dart. Yeah. So it's the programming language of Flutter, and we're all making jokes about why are they two separate projects. So it's history.
Thank you. That makes so much sense, and also explains a bit about the name, where it comes from.
Okay.
Alrighty, I think that's the last question.